So, I really like the brand Kith, and partially I really love how they expose their creative process sometimes, and how one of their forms of marketing is literally the founder of Kith just posting, all of the content that they've produced for specific season or in specific month. I find it very craftful to actually show the studios, show the process, show some of it, like being untouched, or even if it's touched, like, just openly show it. And it's very interesting how it doesn't really get very prominent. Yes, there are some people kind of who saw it or reposted, but if you can see, it's not that big amount of a deal. But I wanted to really get inside and kind of understand what are the trends for right now for fashion or for creative direction, to actually see what I can learn from it, what kind of spots I will what I will spot out of all of it. First of all, I really love the empty image called still life imagery. It means that either it's a signal that we don't need still life, or it's a signal that either something is forgotten, but anyways, I kind of like enjoyed it while looking at it. I will maybe sort something by, I will not sort anything. I will literally go alphabetically right now. So one thing that I liked is that they posted this kind of short video of like the brand campaign of him like wearing this denim wear, and I immediately really love again the multi-layerness of it. So first of all, there is a person, there is a billboard, there is a city and the person, there is a camera between them, and there is also like literally, I don't know if I would be able to notice it when I would be looking at some like teaser, but this kind of idea of putting the words between letters, but between both, so they would both look like H kind of letters, I find really cool. I find it like really interesting. I'm not sure about this kind of campaign. Of course, this is very like person specific, and this might work. I assume that it's in New York, but generally I just like the multi-layerness of things right now. It really makes things maybe stand out in the AI age, because I know technically it's possible to realize all of that, but zooming, panning out without a lot of like artifacts, having something like, move in front of you, I feel all of that kind of, makes the imagery more real, and there is a real desire to kind of for complex layering, because it's something that historically hard to do with AI right now. Maybe later it's going to be fixed, but right now, like prompting this kind of walking like person turning around, like like covering half of, like I feel like there is some, like even this thing where the cars are moving on the background behind the columns, I find like appealing, because it is actually what people would want to see, like more real to it. And like having this car moving here, and it's like you see it 5 layers of the same kind of whenever, like just at once in the span of 1 second. I feel like that's actually quite powerful, and something that I will probably use more in my designs as well. Then we have Key for Mephisto. So I assume this is like the no, why did I mention it? This is footwear brand, and as far as I can see, I didn't actually knew about this brand, but I really like how it looks like. Let me check their website. I really love that many times brands like Kith or some others are just introducing me to brands that I never heard of. In this case, Mephisto, and I never heard of them. I don't know if I were just like out of, less educated in terms of the footwear brand. I'm historically not really into the footwear, like, cult. But it seems like a very regular, like, brand. But then I see right now that they kind of took it and they probably did their own kind of spin on it. As far as I can see, there are a couple of interesting details. I immediately noticed that they use this kind of interesting lacing thing where they kind of use some kind of metal thing. I didn't see it a lot, but it seems like Keith were quite interested in this kind of pattern where it's not going through the loops, it's going through the loops of the loops. And I do feel like there is something like really interesting here. There also, I really love how it mimics the logo. So this logo should look like Mephisto logo, and this is kind of part of the game. And I feel like it generally very speaks like, brownish, greenish, very bright orange, and kind of absolutely neutral. I think these two are very Keith. this is probably something that is left Kith, but I don't know, I'm also making my assumptions here. But generally, it looks really, really cool. Let me see how, it's very also interesting, again, talking about layering. So I can see, like, especially here, like if I will zoom in, so they do this kind of, not sure if it's kind of, it feels like it's real, where they put the shoes on top of each other. I'm not sure that this was in any way like, Photoshop one on top of each other. I feel like this shadow kind of reveals that it's real to me. I don't know. But I feel like they were just shooting from the top and they were using different things to pick up things from the bottom to create this shadow, and they were using the lighting basically that comes from the side to give an idea that, hey, it's actually a stain kind of on the wall, but it's actually being all kind of flat. I feel like that's how they did it. And I like these things. I particularly kind of like and dislike. In my mind, I don't know, shoes are kind of important to keep clean. So whenever I see that some shoe touches other shoe on top, it immediately is such a knee-jerk reaction to me that, hey, something is wrong, something is, I know it's not that big of a deal, it's cleanable, and here it's like in the perfect studio, there is nothing about it, but just like the shoe touching the top soil, the top part of the shoe just gives me immediate ick. I'm not sure if this was like intentional, because I know the cultures around shoes are really different between different, like, just cultures and countries and regions. Sometimes I see people who are like not even want to unpack their shoes forever, and sometimes they're just treating it as a bag, and here's like, a mix between them of being like almost careless, where part of the shoe goes beyond the frame, like every shoe is partially beyond the frame, and the whole thing that is in the middle is them touching them, which is just like, signifies a little bit of this chaotic feeling around it. I really like this kind of monochrome, by the way, thing about these three, like white, off-white, like slightly grayish and kind of orange. I feel like that's also very me coded if you look at my website, and I do really, really like this, color scheme and generally how it looks like. I really like how they designed the laces as well. This is not only not accidental. This is also very, very stage performance of way to put the laces. Like I know they were fighting these laces, unless there is some technique to freeze them in some kind of way or use some glue. I think generally when I deal with any kind of fabrics, I can't even take a photo of a shirt because it's always have like a fucking wrinkle somewhere, and it's so hard to remove. So it's just very interesting that, like you can play with fabrics in some way, and I'm actually curious to see how they would be setting up this photo, on the background. I do like this photo for one reason, is because we're looking at the shadow of a shoe. So usually in classical photography, I feel like you would highlight maybe the biggest, like, phase that you're running into it, but here it's almost using the main light just to highlight the rim, and then the front is actually full shadow. It's kind of, in a way, if you squeeze your eyes a bit, it looks like a human dramatic photo, like, the portrait is being like shot like this. So again, very, very interesting to see how it works. Again, very nice kind of scheme. And so the shoelaces, by the way, shoelaces are kind of like, again, to the point of non-accidental. They did it multiple times, so yeah, it really suggests it's very, very directed, and it's very cool that they've spent some time on this. It's also color called Mellow. And this looks like really the lower ground floor of Kith in London. It really feels like this whole shoe feels like that part. It's a little bit complicated. The colors, the darkness is just like all plays around, and again, the same way of taking a photo of it. I also like multi-layeredness, again, coming back to it. Like, this logo could be on top, it could be on the same level, but instead it's kind of like indented inside, in which we kind of cut off the hole and kind of to show the logo. I feel like that generally immediately gives a sense of more craft, approach to it. Okay, let's go to another campaign, which is Kith for Solomon. So I feel like I have like 60 XT6 or something that I really liked, and it seems like one of the shoes are kind of like inspiring from that, so let's get to it. Okay, first of all, greenery. I also feel like this is very cool because, again, as well as like, demand for real picture. I feel like there are a couple of more demands with touching the grass, and I feel like touching the grass and being like online brand is very like, very interesting coming together. I really like how they incorporated Kith inside of the, kind of the silhouette of the shoe, but also inside of the classical Salomon kind of shapes where it goes to shoelaces. It was like it is a hard challenge because sometimes like if I zoom in, like I would be really struggling that this part is not touching the loop and then this one doesn't touch the loop. So this one touches the space between them, but it's not true for this part. And then here it's like, the space, it tried to make it work. I personally don't really like it, but it's also, I kind of have to look at my Salomons, and I think they are on purpose maximalist ugly in a good way. Like this is their ethos. This is how they look like. So I do feel like this is not a problem. This is just maybe not the style that I'm looking for, but seems like a total adoption into their brand, which I find very awesome. One thing, by the way, I really like about this is that this graphic, like these small ones, the kind of reminds me of retro batteries or like the charge from the old anime shows, and it just like seems really, really powerful in terms of that. I also really like these white and black options. First of all, black is kind of like understandably just black and easy to work with. The white and having like almost like this kind of mellow color again from the previous campaign, working with white is really something that I didn't explore much, and I should, because it really gives this kind of interesting feeling towards these things. And then aesthetically, the whole frame is just very nice because they included multiple types of greenery, and you can see how I didn't even notice this, but they gave this kind of, how do you call this? Vine like of things around the shoes, and it really, even without noticing it, it just drives your kind of eyes around this composition, and then all patches of this kind of land also lands just right around the shoes, so it really creates like really nice silhouette. And then another silhouette that I really, really like is almost like an onion skin, or the way human foot work. Like if you take your shot, like if you're walking and you basically take a shot every like 0.1 seconds or something, and then you will overlay it on top of each other to see how your leg progresses. This is probably how person's leg progresses in that. It looks like a moving picture, although it's a different sneakers. It's a kind of absolutely different shows, but it looks like a shadow of the say. It's like feels like a motion blur, but staticized, which I find really interesting. By the way, and also prompting this vine would take some time if I would be able to recreate it, and it's just important to mention that there is always a demand for this kind of level of craft, and like it's very interesting to look at it. Again, very nice layering, taken from a little bit from below, and I really love how something goes beyond the edges, so it kind of tells you almost like the story whenever the three sneakers are present, that it's always in motion. It really always feels like they're running from each other in a way, or running in the same direction. They're always like, even the angle here is like specifically how you would expect the runners, if you look at the profile of a runner, how it would look like, it really feels like that. And that kind of, I really like photography that has motion inside without things moving. So things are not moving here, it's static, it kind of remains, but you feel that it's kind of dynamic image, and that's what I really, really like about it. I also overthink a lot, by the way. I do like this one. Again, this doesn't feel like static at all. It feels like so much things will kind of move here, and then it's very fragile, and you're not sure if this is like real or not. The green here is like amplified so much, like it kind of I don't know, maybe it looks like this in the real world. To me, it looks a little bit also plasticky, which Salomon is, because it's not really natural type of like shoe, in a way of like, it doesn't look very, what do you call it, like natural, like leather shape, like the shape of something like elegant. It's very like almost like artificial, and I feel like this bright green really helps it like stand out, but also speak the same language as Salomon. It's like very, human custom. It's like human progress, very kind of tacky. And I feel like, even the color scheme is very, very speaking to it. But then again, the kind of this green, I also really like this parts. Like this part, like, is like very cool. Like this pure white, but then immediately you face like the dark, dark green, almost like black. And it's just like, it cools very cool together. Something is like almost already over the water, but it's like, hey, it's not a problem because it's Salomons. It probably have Gore-Tex or something to protect it. So it's like, it looks very cool. This is again one of those photos where many things are out of the frame, but they kind of work together. Again, this type of photo causes me anxiety. I see why they're needed, but I would never. It's not my style. I don't know. Something is off with these photos where things are touching like here. Even this gives me anxiety. This gives me anxiety, but still less than that photo where they were literally touching on top. Really like this direction of photography, and I really love this stripe. I saw like Salmon have like a lot of different styles. There are like multicolored ones which I had, and like they really look fantastic. I think they were the reason I bought the shoe actually, just because this kind of small stripe of different color presentation just like looks very cool. And I just, I feel like they know this and they started experimenting more. I feel like it's an iceberg or a mountain or something else maybe, I don't know, but it's really, really looks interesting. And I love the background, love the water here is like very nicely rendered, like photographed, and it looks very cool. Again, the shadow part, on fuss, I feel like that's kind of a trend as well. Maybe I should kind of explore more in the photography to put things in the shadow which are in the very front of things. I feel like that might actually help with some visuals. Oh, touching the soil. I know I have some kind of personal reaction to it. Yeah, this is kind of, by the way, the injection of color I meant, and this is very interesting how they show the preview of it. It almost looks like lingerie, like, the women's clothing type of thing where they kind of reveal a little bit behind the dress, and it's just like it makes it all come together. I have to say, I don't know if the word were the right, but I'm kind of sad that they didn't put K or something here instead of Salomon. I know this is Salomon's technology and stuff, and maybe Kith design, but it still would feel like a very nice touch to, for example, make this like a metal or make some kind of leather or reuse the leather here in different shape, maybe some kind of a symbol of Kith. I think this one is the point of touch with the brand, and I feel like it's just like would be so cool if they would have implemented that as well. By the way, very interesting photo because here you can clearly see that they were using like a small sharp light to from the side, which give this kind of very nice texture to it, but it gives such a big shadow here. It looks like mud. I don't know if this is like intentional or they couldn't hide it, but even hiding it a little bit here would kind of maybe hide it. I don't know, feels like an intentional mistake, but maybe it's also so meta that it's intentional, of like, hey, it looks like a bit like mud, like it's wet, but it's all right, it's just a shadow. And and if it was a wet, it's just, I don't know, maybe I think again overthinking what they thought during it. Again, very interesting highlight, very interesting lighting comes from the side, and everything comes together here. Again, since they repeated it and they clearly saw it, probably not a mistake, but generally very, very interesting way of looking at it. Okay, they have the lookbook. Very kind of interesting. Again, everything is layered. You can see that some plans they put on front just to layer with things. So they have the background, they have the subject, they have a couple of things like that overlaying the camera, and then they have a couple of things that are kind of next to them. And again, very, very detailed in kind of way where even you have like a second background where there is a glass and there's something behind that glass. Again, I feel like this layerism of thing is very, very kind of important, and you can see it like everywhere here. Again, all of the same techniques, different shot, different different things, but still have this kind of the vibrancy of the layers in different ways. This feels more and more already a little bit more kind of like staged and flat, if I may say. And it's also like something that you know, I think was present in the original teaser. It's generally I really like this photography, but I really like this one in this kind of orangery room rather than on the flat background. I feel like this one becomes a little bit more flat, and the model really stands out there in front of it. Yeah, but generally love how it looks like. Love the loafers. I would never be able to wear this outfit. Like, I just know that I'm not built to look stylish in this. I would look like a I wouldn't look good. But them, like, you know, experimenting in this direction and kind of trying to make it work is really commendable. Really love the colors here of this pants. Like, it does feel like they cut out. I can tell by this kind of small outline here. Like, if you see the highlight on the edge, you can see like it just like half a pixel around. It really feels like it cut out, almost like they did cut out, and they increased the vibrancy here to make the pants like be looked. I know that it's probably not the right technique, but I also appreciate that it looks kind of cool. It looks futuristic in a way. It looks very over processed, but in the final kind of stage, I think in some kind of Instagram ad, it would look absolutely fine. And this is one of those things where, you know, you can just sometimes be okay with some imperfections, and even be okay with people knowing that you edited the photo, and that would still be all right because it makes it so minimal and so clear. But again, it's like only after looking at this for some time that it reveals such. I also think they were just playing with a lot of dark light here. It's like it feels like it was quite light and quite dark, and they were like pulling up everything they can to avoid this kind of absolutely black, you know, black things of this black zones of these photos. Again, really nicely. Here is like also some plant here, right, that kind of blurs so much that you don't even see the plant, but it still reads not as part of the pants, but part of the, like, you know, foreground plant. And I feel like whenever you are going to see this photo somewhere in the campaign or Instagram, it would just like look very very 3D-ish, very layered. So it's just generally very cool. By the way, in their closing, you can also see the multi-layering part. I also kind of think that it is the modern, you know, sign of times to have more layers and kind of, you know, present them in different ways. Well, let me quickly jump. I don't feel like the rest of it is really unique in any way. We also have the product imagery, which they are quite famously putting on some kind of white, on the grayish background, sorry. I think they are putting it on the grayish background because then when you show it on the white background of the website, it kind of just opens up nicely. Let's see what kind of social ads. So again, yeah, they were putting this kind of, you know, this text, I feel like it's Georgia or something, and it really does feel cool. Here, by the noise in this kind of video, I can assume it was very dark. I feel like that's, again, my initial kind of suspicion kind of agreed. But I like how they did it. I really like this kind of, you know, sprinkle theme. I feel like that's actually very cool. This kind of presentation is cool. I'm curious mostly about videos if they have like really interesting shapes, if they were basically always fixing stuff. But I love this. Again, I know it's very dark out there, but I love this like extra grain here. You can see that how aggressive it is, that it's almost like even the edges of the shirt, even though it's like perfectly polished, they become more fluffy because of the grain that is persists. And I feel like that's actually quite interesting. And by the way, this was the last photo I saw, so I really love that. These glasses, I'm not sure if they really look like this or they painted on top of it, but it really looks unreal. It doesn't look like real world glasses. I'm not sure how they look like. I don't feel like they look like this, but I like how they look like on the image, which is the most important thing for the brand photography. So I think they did it, and it's very nice. By the way, really also interesting how they have a shadow, like such a harsh shadow under the words, again, to set out, again, the background. And it looks really clean. Anyways, thank you for being with my analysis. I definitely took the layering, graying out, and the lighting setups from this, and I will try to recreate some of this. Thank you. See you later.